thing about the poet is that the studio is in your head. You know, it's not like, you know, my friends who are visual artists, there's just that struggle to get space and to, you know, you have to be able to run a studio and stuff. And the thing that's interesting about being a poet is that you don't have that burden at all, you know, and so it's sort of like what you carry is what you're working with, you know. But the condition of that is really important.
Right.
You know, so you really have to, I mean, like all the ways that people, you know, we don't even hear about it so much now, unplugging, you know, the various ways that of not, you know, or riding the waves of too much media and using it. Like I really found that it's exciting to write, to leave lines on Twitter, you know, to just kind of like write as I go a lot. And I don't, you know, sometimes I think, oh, this is destroying my poetry, and I've tried assembling my tweets, and sometimes they kind of work, and sometimes, I mean, but they're actually no worse than all the lines I would find in my notebook if they were just sort of fragmented and shattered, you know. So I feel like I'm sort of like, you know, varying it from really needing to push things away, and then finding, of course, that I then don't do the right thing. You know, it's sort of like to get organized for today, I kept making time, and then I would find myself either cleaning my apartment or reading War and Peace, which I'm just currently addicted to, you know, or just doing anything but writing, you know. But I think still clearing out that space means that there's just kind of you're welcoming it, you know, and you know, you just can't be utterly busy unless you've decided to be that poet. I think I have a title for what I'm going to do. And what I'm going to do is talk a little about what's brought me back to Boston after being from Boston and doing some research at the Woodberry Poetry Room, which is the poetry library here at Harvard that has a lot of recordings. I'm already totally self-conscious about what Boston accent to have or not have, or I'm already imitating me. I was born up the street at Mount Auburn Hospital. My dad was a postal worker at Story Street in the square. Which is so weird because the post office is gone now, but it's a different building. But the lovely little houses on the right side are still exactly there. So we would sit there and wait for my dad, and those same buildings are there, but not the post office. And I worked in my Catholic school uniform in the 60s at the Harvard Coop when they sold ties and stationaries at the front. And all of that defines me as a townie, a word I think people outside of Boston may use, but I think it's mostly a Boston thing. In the same way that a package store used to be a packy, and maybe it still is. Did you go to the packy? Warrior from the Other Side of the Hill, that's my title. And that's warrior with an A, not an O, though I guess I'm a warrior too. It's the title I'm getting to, and I got part of it from Jim Dunn, who took me on a poet from Boston, who took me on a walk on the other side of Beacon Hill, where some of the poets, John Wieners and Steve Jonas, or two I want to talk about, lived in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it was the wrong side of Beacon Hill, which I think there's no wrong side now of Beacon Hill, which is a sort of erasure, because if there's only one side, where did the other side go? And there's a geographic loss. If it's a hill and you go up and you go down and nothing happens, it's a very serious loss. If there's just a good side, then that's not even a hill. I left Boston for New York in 1974, and I realized I had a distinct accent that would tell you something about me, and I actually decided to commodify it, which didn't mean anybody was buying my accent. But in the 70s, there was Bruce Springsteen and there was Patti Smith, working class kids who were very much being heard. And I think deciding to be that, to deliberately represent what you actually did represent, was in a way like preserving the bad side of the hill and saying it was good, calling it mother. In a way, that's my whole talk right there. You probably all know this. They call it non-rhotic, the I that doesn't sound after a vowel, post-vocalic, they could say. And the story is that in the 16th century, the people who came to Boston were British, and increasingly they, by the 17th century, were country people, and the soft R is rustic. It's simply that. It's a piece of English speech that's stuck here. And interestingly, isn't the Boston accent the major export of the city? People like to point out that it used to be understood as an upper-class accent, and governors from previous generations, mainly a guy named Peabody, had the accent, and Kennedy had the accent. And this is so interesting, somebody in the earlier 20th century decided to see if there was a Harvard accent and how it developed, say, from your freshman year to graduation. So somewhere in Harvard, there's recordings of like decades of these recordings, and one could actually find Kennedy, sound-wise, a famous Boston export, and see how his accent developed in 4 years. But I can't help thinking that to not lose the Boston accent was his own kind of, because you think, I mean, like by the time he was president, did he really have a Boston accent, you know? But that was his own kind of commodifying, isn't really the word, politicizing, owning, but lingering on a sound or a sound system that sounds like home, and even resist banishment of that from which you would present to the world. I come from here. And that's the kind of thing you'd want to say again and again. Wiener's mother talked in an artificial voice as if heaven cared. He loved her in the underground, her gray coat and hair, sitting there. He returns to the sound, almost patting it. In a way, it makes English a romance language, extending the vowel so that there's a more musical inline. I'm just saying. One of the ways that they know that the 17th century people were using the soft R is that the language hadn't been standardized, so George would be spelled without an R. And of course it meant it sounded like George, or it rhymed with Dodge, right? My mother, who is still alive, who is 95, but I think that whole dissonance right there, I mean, like, as somebody who grew up in Boston and learned to read in Boston and learned to write in Boston, there was a real problem, because I'd hear George, and then I'd look at a sign and it was George, you know? So I was just like, well, which is it, you know? And even early on, when I first started writing poetry, I had kind of an impulse to, like, when I wrote start, I'd want it to look like start, and so I would make it S-T-A-H-H-T, you know? And I knew it was sort of wrong, and I knew it was somehow louche even, and that it wasn't going to take me where I wanted to go, but there was a way in which that dissonance, and I think that is language itself, and what really happens and doesn't happen in poetry, which is the body and the word, and how is the body disclosed and not disclosed at the moment of writing, you know, because of course the absence of an accent in writing becomes, on a certain level, the accent of the body. I mean, the absence of the body. And then, well, I'll get to it. My mother, who is still alive, who is 95, used to make corn chowder, and it was almost an ingredient, the silent R. Like if I think about corn chowder someplace, I think if it wasn't pronounced correctly, I would think it wouldn't taste the same. I heard a woman say about her friend, "There's nothing to her," but of course it sounded like "tua." I thought a whole other gendered sound, and so it's like, there's nothing to him. There's nothing to him. And yet if you want to emphasize it more at the end, you'd say nothing. There's nothing to him, nothing. Because in a way, everybody's doing drag, you know, everybody is doing their accent really consciously, you know, and so if you really want, I mean, it's like the accent, and the absence of the accent becomes part of like emphasis and how you would put weight on it. Putting it on, putting it off is how you would put weight on a word and weight on your intention. These are things that are as entirely articulate as expressions, which tell it all by gesture and silence, these shifts. And language is silence too, and tone. And the thing this poem's called Western Poem, and the thing that's sort of cool about this poem is I went to UMass Boston, and part of the education that was fantastic there is we had a class called Irish Literature. And what it basically was a reprieve for working class Irish kids who only knew from like Danny Boy and just the whole leprechaun Irish American culture. And suddenly we were being exposed to James Joyce and O'Casey and Synge, and also Welsh poetry. And so there was this beautiful Welsh Penguin book of Welsh verse that we read. And there was these amazing poems that were very moving to me called Nomic Stanzas. And what it was basically was like a nature poem that would then say something pithy and moral, like a branch falls, the guilty flee, though no man pursueth, you know? And I was like, that's so great. And then 40 years pass, and then I moved to Marfa, Texas, and I'm like so crazy about the landscape that I write this poem. This is totally gnomic. So this is Western Poem. Purple clouds, my doubts. Iridescent cream, my loss. Purple mountains, my friends. Buzzards circling overhead, my hopes. Birds singing, jagged singing, my indecision. Wrecked skinny tree, my past. Photographs I send home, my indiscretion. Amber streetlight, my reading. My appetite. Red striped sky, my confusion. Bright yellow gray sky, my ardor. Car lights, my commotion. Telephone pole, my wishes. Stop sign, my fear. Family dollar. Courthouse, my opinion. Black cloud, white sky, hesitation. Black cloud, white sky, bliss. Blinking signals, my intentions. Black mountains, too many suggestions. Skipping white lines, my attention. A young cowboy first saw the lights. The horns on your van. My defensiveness. That old train. My dreams. That old train. And if you know Marfa, there's so nothing there that the train comes through 5 times a day, and it just wails, and the whole town is like, it's like the bells in another town. It just absorbs the whole town. It's so gorgeous. And then you're stuck at a traffic light looking at it, like you're Instagramming it. So let me read a couple of historic miles from my selected, and then Jackie and I will talk. This is sort of a sorrowful poem called I wrote this in Belfast, What Tree Am I Waiting? That whole part of the world where I won't go anymore, that whole separation that I won't feel, high in this house, in this hemisphere, in this artificial light that is artificial, in the earliest morning, dark, in pages and pens, in an unfamiliar bed, in the foot curl, furniture, each rumble, when morning comes and it's still morning and it's still night. I married a dead girl. We were born in her bloom. Remember that fat bumblebee landed on a lamp? I opened the doors and I forgot, and the house got colder and colder. Where is this house? The seam between boards merely gains my attention. It's dark and thin. I monitor each situation, my bladder growing full. Climb down, climb up. What tree am I waiting? My whole life in weather, waiting for my raft. I'll fly to another island. I'll take a train. Already I know it will hurt. This is the hurt country. I came here to hold the hurt like a bird, like a tree. Traffic has rings. We watch it whirl around, damaging our night. Great continents hold the feelings and the ages. What is mine? Going blind. Great masses of them not going home. The country drew a line because of memory. One said, I feel my heart race ahead. In eternity, there is this ache. There is this wakefulness. And this one's a little nasty in a good way, which is to say, on my block in New York, there's like a new taco joint called El Dub. I can't remember the name of it. Deblito? It's a devil. What is it? El Deblito? Thank you. I was like, that was great. So I would endlessly go in there waiting for my taco, and then endlessly devil would start to show up in my poem, because it was kind of this new satanic moment. And then this one time I went and I didn't have either phone or, I had like the shittiest pencil to write with, which is, I write by hand, so it was a very unpleasant feeling, the communication between paper and pencil. So prophesy. I'm playing with the devil's cock. It's like a crayon. It's like a fat, burnt crayon. I'm writing a poem with it. I'm writing that down. All that rattling heat in this room, I'm using that. I'm using that tingling rattle, that light in the middle of the room. It's my host. I've always been afraid of you, scared you're God and something else. I'm afraid when you're yellow, tawny, white it's okay, transparent, cool, you don't look like home. My belly is homeless, flopping over the waist in my jeans like an omelet. There better be something about feeling fat. What there really is a lack of emptiness. I'm aiming for that empty feeling. Gonna get some of that, and then I'll be back. And of course, this was in Poetry Magazine, and of course, everybody's on Twitter. So, disgustingly, they tweeted, my belly is homeless, flopping over the waist of my jeans like an omelet. I was like, motherfuckers. It's just like, how could that be like great? It was just like, it's like, thank you. And this is the only authentic, Allen Ginsberg wrote late in his life, he was at the harmonium singing these blues songs. We were like, why is he doing that? You know, I'm like in my 60s now, I love blues. I'm like, blues is so great. So this is my one, it's called Harmonica. I'm not going to do the Robert Lowell or the Kennedy poem. I think you could buy the book at the Harvard bookstore. You could read the Lowell, you can read the Kennedy poem. This is called Harmonica. I mean, those are like my hit poems, and I use the Boston accent, but I think that would be too much like singing for my supper. Harmonica. I don't want to put my glasses on because I don't want to see. Don't want to move again because I don't want to live. Don't want to love again because I don't want to lose. Don't want to eat again because I don't want to be full. Don't want to drink again because I don't want to feel quenched. Don't want to sleep again because I don't want to wake up. I don't want to live in the summer again because I don't want to be hot. Don't want you to kiss me again because I don't want to be alive. Don't want you to see me again because I don't want to vanish. Don't want to ride my bike because I don't want to get there. Don't want to know my family anymore because I don't want to remember me. Don't want to walk my dog because I don't want to be out. Don't want to stay in anymore because I don't want to be alone. Don't want to be tired anymore because I don't want to feel old. Don't want to eat candy anymore because I don't want to feel sweet. Don't want to talk to my friends anymore because I don't want them to know me. Don't want to sing anymore because I don't want to hear me. Don't want to die anymore because I don't want to see God. Don't want to live anymore because I don't want to repeat. Oh, that was the greatest thing Helene Johnson said. Like, so she kind of went into private writing, and she kept writing, and yet every now and then a scholar will be like, knock, knock, knock. Are you Helene Johnson, a member of the Harlem Renaissance? You know? And at one point when somebody cornered her, they were like, is this exciting for you when you're contacted by people about your work? And she was like, I'm never surprised by repetition. Just like, so, it's such a great, tough old lady thing to say, right? I'm going to read a few more, and then this one's called Shh. I don't think I can afford the time to not sit right down and write a poem about the heavy-lidded white rose I hold in my hand. I think of snow. A winter night in Boston, a drunken waitress stumbled on a bus that careens through Somerville, the end of the line where I was born, an old man shaking me. He could have been my dad. You need a ride? Wait, he said. This flower is so heavy in my hand. He drove me home in his old blue Dodge, a thermos next to me, cigarette packs on the dash, so quiet like Boston is quiet, Boston in the snow. It's New York, plates are clattering on St. Mark's Place. Should I call you? Can I go home now and work with this undelivered message in my fingertips? It's summer. I love you. I'm surrounded by snow. This one's called Writing. I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything, but that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right. I used to work in the jazz room at the West End Bar, and it was very, like a whole long story, but that thing where I noticed how both bass players made faces, and they were like, like this thing. There was just a whole bodily thing that accompanied the act of playing a stand-up bass. And drummers taught. They would hit the cymbal and go, that's right. Like they were just having this, conversation. No, I'm not going to read that. Okay, I'm just going to read one more poem, and this is called My Box, which was a dirty word in grade school. And if you wanted to insult somebody, it was like horrible. It was a name for a girl. You're talking about a girl's pussy, right? Box. And we would be mean, and we would go, box, to insult somebody as they walked across the room. And strangely, then I'm going to really over-introduce this poem, but somehow it's sort of like this one thing about being female and being involved with women, and then being involved intergenerationally. I've had a number of younger girlfriends, which meant that after I'd been through menopause, there was still Tampax around, but not mine, And the design of the box would change, too. So you'd be like sitting in the bathroom on the toilet looking at I never used that box. No. It says nothing, it's only faintly part of the poem, but I like to tell that story. My box. I think I'm basically trying to control the word box by over-anecdotalizing it. In terms of design, one box is colored orange. The one you want, it always is, and sits in the bathroom of anyone's house because that's what she wants. It's choosing that wakes things up. I wondered how long all that I needed and encountered here would come like a wave, not the shake but the after effects, and this box did say there was a way to see this thing alone. July called it calculus. What is comes in boxes. What is not comes in waves, the dots between. Mountains surround us, and I say, they are more marvelous than the sea, way overhead. I like flying over them, too, thinking, that is home, those crazy bumps. When we drive into them tomorrow, it won't be bam. It means swirling on the edge of a cup, and if you don't watch me like a hawk, I won't be scared. I want to be loved like a sunbeam. That is, it comes across the room or the ocean. You know the way I drive. I want to lift your fear like a bonnet and kiss your living face. Here, this is mine. Don't misunderstand me. Thanks. Now, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so off the hook now.
Yeah. Maybe a good place to start would be to kind of talk a little bit about who you were in Boston, how you feel rooted in Boston, or who you were here versus who you were when, or who you are in New York.
I mean, the part of my experience of looking back on, at least as a poet, or even as a queer person, I feel like I hadn't found anything or anyone, especially myself, yet when I lived in Boston, you know. So I just was like sort of young and amorphous and full of desire, and you know, and sort of struggling with the whole notion of being from a place and looking at my own and my friends' ambivalent relationships to it, to be, Boston has such a kind of funny, segregated in some ways, and class, I don't even know how to put that, but you know what I'm saying. It's sort of like, and really occupied by so many universities, and so it's sort of like, it's such a kind of educated town in a certain way, and yet it was very hard to find any wiggle room into a poetry world that I didn't, how a part of the problem is if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know how to find it, and so, I mean, what's strange, of course, is retrospectively looking at Boston, there was so much here that I was sitting right next to at various points, but there was, like in my head, there was no there. There was no, I mean, one of the things I've learned, like when my experience of Boston, which can't be the consummate truth about Boston, was that everybody I met sort of wanted to be something as opposed to like being it, kind of like I met a lot of cab drivers who wrote novels and girls who were taking dance classes, and there was kind of a, we're on our way kind of way, in Boston, but it's like, so, and I was like that, and so I kind of wanted to get away from that. I thought I have to go someplace else then to get there because it's not going to happen here. And and when I landed in New York, I was mostly troubled by disbelief. Like I would meet people in my building and they would say, "We got a band," and I would like, "Ugh, a band on the 4th floor," and it was like Blondie, So it took me, part of my education in New York, and what I really lacked in Boston was this knowing that the local was something, that there actually was something here. My presumption always was that there wasn't, and I got to New York, and, I suppose there probably are, New York is very much, like, it's, there's a lot of everything, so it's not hard to find it either, because everything is shouting its name in New York all the time. It's just a city about advertising itself. But it was, it was harder to, I was kind of forming from the inside in Boston, and so just that condition of not knowing. And it's interesting, in New York, I've watched generations of people come to New York and still not, it's not just Boston, it's everywhere. It's like people don't believe that the local is the thing. They just think that there's some great thing and it's out there. It can't be you. It can't be this person I'm talking to is this, is the amazing thing. And so often, so they're missing the thing that's, and likewise, I'm an alcoholic, and the joke about alcoholism is so many people will be sitting in a bar going, "What's wrong with my life?" And it's like, here, you couldn't, and so I think it's very hard to kind of reconcile, the there with what being, the there is what you want, you know? I mean, the problem, like that famous Gertrude Stein, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, the Stein line about there's no there. The truth more often is that there is a there. You just don't want to see it, you know? It's sort of like this kind of an erasure that is so increasingly the condition, I think, of how we live, you know?
So,
or too much there.
what brought you to New York, and did you write poetry when you were in Boston?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just actually, when you're talking about, yesterday we were talking a little bit about this question of whether or not people change over time and whether their personality is static or if people can have like a night and day kind of transformation. And when I was reading Chelsea Girls recently, I was actually struck by the beginning of the section, The Kid, where you're in 7th grade and you're given a punished task, and in your head you're repeating Eileen Myles 500 times, I will not talk in the corridors.
Mm-hmm.
And to me this seems to be announcing you as a writer or as someone who will not shut up. Even in Catholic school, you're being punished for talking in the corridors.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the emergence of your voice as a writer and how you discovered your writing voice.
Yeah. I mean, my writing comes from keeping diaries, you know? It's just like, I didn't even have my own room when I was growing up. And I remember like sitting out, when I was given a diary for the first time when I was 10, and sitting out in the hall under the light and writing in my notebook. And it was the first time I felt like I had some space in my house. You know, it was just like, oh my God, you know? And I think, you know, I think I was very good at art when I was a kid, so I was supposed to go to art school. Mm-hmm. And it was dumb Eileen was going to go to art school, and that was what you know, kind of, it was kind of great that I could draw. But I just kind of, but I had the brother, you know, the older brother who was a very smart one, you know, and I really felt like I have to, you know, like I felt that this is untrue and that I was actually as intelligent. I went to college to prove that I was as smart as my brother. And what happened quickly was, instead of drawing everybody around me, I started to write poems just as my new mode of distraction. And after college, you know, when I was devastated because I thought I would, you know, like my brother and I were the first ones in the family to go to college, and we thought we would be marching under the arch to the future of, you know, some other class, some other way of living. And instead I was doing the same shitty jobs, you know, like hostessing at the Fenway Motor Motel, working at the Pewter Pot, working at, you know, just like I've worked waitressed every place in Harvard Square, you know, that existed then. But what was interesting is at a certain point I realized that, so I was thinking, this is horrible. Why did I go to college? You know, but what I noticed that what I was actually doing, and the last job I had in Boston was working at Little Brown, and I was writing poems at work, you know, writing on my, you know, at my register, wherever, you know, and so one day I wrote a poem and I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm doing. I'm actually writing poems. This is what, you know, this could be my job and not this terrible place, you know? Uh-huh. And that was kind of, and that sort of sent me to New York, because at that moment I didn't know what to do next. I'd already gone to Europe and hitchhiked. I'd done all the things, like I've been very aware of the fact that my generation is always, it may not be true with the next generations, but maybe it always is, that we were always doing the same thing. We're all going to Europe to hitchhike now. We're all working at the Fernald School now. We're all, you know, doing legal proofreading, you know. It's just like during the boom phase of you know, selling, you know, American Airlines all night long, and, you know, the whole buying and selling 80s. It's like everybody, 80s and 90s, everybody was, you know, all the artists were sitting up all night long, you know, like proofreading the documents that they were making to make the sale. And so anyway, there was always this collectivity. And so suddenly we were going to graduate school. And even though I had no feeling that I really wanted to go to graduate school, I didn't know how to move next. Mm-hmm. And so I applied to a bunch of schools, and the only one that took me was Queens College.
And that was to do an
MA in creative writing, which I quickly dropped out of and just became a New Yorker.
So you did not, when you had that realization, when you were writing poems on the receipts, which I actually used to do when I was a cashier at a grocery store, I would write on the receipts. Also worked at a motel in Florida. But when you had that recognition, like, oh, I'm writing poems. I could be a writer. This could be the thing that I do. You didn't resist it. You just went with it.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what's funny? You know, my role model as a poet, since I didn't know any poets, Seymour Glass. Like in J.D. Salinger novels, you know, there was this whole fictionalized account of the poet. And he would write on receipts. And everybody, he was so oblivious to fame and aspiration that he would leave, you know, like poems on scraps of paper in his pockets, and his family would all look and find these beautiful, you know, and I thought, oh, I want to, I'm like that, you know?
I could write poems on receipts.
I could leave shit in my pocket and have it discovered by other people.
We can talk a little bit about the life of the poet. Reading Chelsea Girls recently, I was actually struck by the rhythm of the text and the rhythm of your life and how that mirrors the rhythm of the text. So throughout the book, people are taking speed, you're chasing girls, stealing vitamins, walking slowly, drinking coffee, eating hot dogs. And I just wondered if you think
That's such a
that
great
the
list, by the way. That was fabulous. Just when I thought I knew what you were doing, you changed it. It was good.
Well, I was actually on the bus here, I was thinking about this comment that Ben Lerner made during the Q&A when he read for an event that the Woodberry Poetry Room co-sponsored, and someone asked him about his process, and he started talking about Walt Whitman, how Walt Whitman writes about loafing all the time, and he was saying that in order to write America, you need to be porous, you need to be observing what's going on around you. So the task of the poet is kind of to loaf and remain porous in some ways. I don't know. I mean, obviously we write poems too, but I just wonder if you could speak a little bit about life rhythms and writing.
Yeah, I think, I'm so glad you said porous, not poor.
Yeah, no.
It's just like, truly, you know, like that cliche about the poet is just not helpful, and
true.
you know. But yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I think that, because the truest thing about the poet is that the studio is in your head. You know, it's not like, you know, my friends who are visual artists, there's just that struggle to get space and to, you know, you have to be able to rent a studio and stuff. And the thing that's interesting about being a poet is that you don't have that burden at all, you know, and so it's sort of like what you carry is what you're working with, you know. But the condition of that is really important.
Right.
You know, so you really have to, I mean, like all the ways that people, you know, we don't even hear about it so much now, unplugging, you know, the various ways that of not, you know, or riding the waves of too much media and using it. Like I really found that it's exciting to write, to leave lines on Twitter, you know, to just kind of like write as I go a lot. And I don't, you know, sometimes I think, oh, this is destroying my poetry, and I've tried assembling my tweets, and sometimes they kind of work, and sometimes, I mean, but they're actually no worse than all the lines I would find in my notebook if they were just sort of fragmented and shattered, you know. So I feel like I'm sort of like, you know, varying it from really needing to push things away, and then finding, of course, that I then don't do the right thing. You know, it's sort of like to get organized for today, I kept making time, and then I would find myself either cleaning my apartment or reading War and Peace, which I'm just currently addicted to, you know, or just doing anything but writing, you know. But I think still clearing out that space means that there's just kind of you're welcoming it, you know, and you know, you just can't be utterly busy unless you've decided to be that poet.
Oh, I know. This is something that I've talked about with my analyst a bit, about the rhythm of graduate school and how that kind of forces me onto a wavelength that isn't really conducive to writing poetry, because it's constant grind. The next assignment, the next book, the next hurdle, the next hoop to jump through. Yeah, so I don't know. That's helpful, though. I think I'm going to have to do some mental spring cleaning.
I have one thing to add too, which is funny, because I think that a lot of friends of mine who teach, and I teach sometimes, it's just like, you know, so you're teaching workshops, but then the problem with that is you've got to figure out how to not have to read their work, you know, because you're like the sad poet going home with hundreds and hundreds of poems, you know. So I think, but what I see is a lot of people, and especially my younger friends who are adjuncting at 5 schools, you know, it's like, when would they ever write? And so this is the reward for being a poet. You get to read everybody else's fledgling work. But but a lot of people I know are starting to do is turn the workshop into a studio situation. So you write in class. And so what that means is the poet running the class also writes. So you kind of, we were talking earlier about scholars who blithely assign their own books to their students. And as a poet, you can't really do that because it's sort of gross saying, now look at this amazing poem of mine, you know, in my book. It just doesn't. But what you can do is appropriate their work time, you know, and make it, and assign them to write poems that actually you need to write, and then you write it with them, you know. So you get them to kind of advance your work in a certain way and be the studio.
Be the studio. Let's see here. Can you tell me what it was like appearing in the Boston Globe? And I just thought, I mean, I remember seeing it, the newspaper. Actually, I like walked into the math department and I just saw a huge picture of you in the Boston Globe. And we talked a little bit about it when you were here during the pop culture.
No, just being in the Globe meant the most, just because, you know, it was the paper that was on the breakfast table every morning growing up, and it was like, oh my God, you know, and there was like even a picture of us standing on Swan Place in Arlington in our little, you know, 6-year-old clothes. I was like, this is crazy that that's in the Boston Globe. This is, you know, so yeah, no, it's almost better than having a poem in the New Yorker.
Almost better than having.
It was like all those words are there.
Did your family read it, or how did
my family
people react? Or people you knew and
people I knew, people I went to high school with, read it in grade school. They read it.
You're a writer? Or were people surprised?
They were impressed that I was in the Globe. They were less impressed by me. They were impressed that whatever is me was in the Globe was what they were excited about, you know.
So what is it like for you being back here doing this residency?
Really sweet and really exciting and almost pornographic.
Pornographic?
Like, and I mean, I just don't know what that word means, except that like when I was a child, I mean, I didn't, as a young person in Boston, I just was already such a problem drinker that nobody would let me drive. You know, I just drove my mother's Falcon once down Mass Ave and, you know, scraped the car next to me, knocked off the drain pipe of the house. Nobody would trust me driving. And so I was just like a child and a passenger in Boston. So driving around Boston and seeing, you know, like Peel Square, you know, Dane Street. I was like, everything is like lurid, you know, and just brings back the history of learning to read and moments, even like the poem I read about, there was a bus between, you know, like being on a bus and falling asleep and being a waitress, which was like, I think I worked at the worst house that used to be in Harvard Square, and, you know, I'd get drunk at work and get on the bus and fall asleep, you know, and this sweet guy drove me. But what's so strange is that driving around the other day, I was like, oh my God, this is where the bus stopped. You know, and I think it's not even where the buses stop anymore in Somerville, you know, but it was like, it's such a, you know, memories are just so visceral and weirdly planted that when they wake up, you know, it's not even something you could do writing with. It's more a human body thing, you know, but it's so deep being here for me, you know.
What was Harvard Square like when you lived here?
It was really cool. It was paradise. It was like take the bus from Arlington to Harvard Square and just like, because there was an ice cream store, Brigham's, people probably remember, but it was a chain. And before it was pink and blue, it was wood. You know, like the highest booths, really high dark wood booths. Right, the Pewter Pot, right? The Brigham's right in Harvard Square, right at the corner. It was like, people were selling drugs in there. It was just like it was so high that you could be down there, like, you know. And in high school I didn't take drugs, but I was very excited by the fact that was going on. And then it was all carved, you know, like his, you know, and stuff, and written Club 47. I mean, when I think about what I didn't do, because I wasn't into blues, so I was like, Lightning Hopkins, who's that? I was like, oh my God, you know, or the. You know, so hard. I mean, it was the Club 47. Everything. It was so incredibly, like, it was just an education to be here. It was so hip. You know.
And how does it feel now?
Well, it's like a lot is covered, a lot is gone. You know, I mean, it's sort of like it's still, you know, there's still obviously something. The bones of the place are still similar, and then sometimes the mixes of people look somewhat similar. But you know, like this kind of a large underclass that's not here. And then when you see, you know, homeless people in Portland, they really stick out more, because there isn't this in-between. You know, it seems like everybody's well except for the unwell, you know, and that's, you know, that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, even since I've been here, I remember Dana Ward has a poem where he mentions the Harvard Square Aubin pen, and when Harvard Square Aubin pen closed like a month ago, I
Yeah.
felt like it was the end of a chapter, even though I've only been here for like 2 years. Yeah. So let's open it up to questions from the audience if we have a few minutes, and we have a mic also.
Feel so official now. One of the things that I just actually finished Chelsea Girls probably 3 weeks ago, and that was my first experience with your writing, and I loved it. I thought it was really moving, and I thought it was really awesome to just get that kind of perspective and rawness from a woman in the 70s, and I just connected with it a lot. Another thing I connected with today was the writing on the receipt papers. I worked in retail. I quit my job probably 2 days ago, but I used to write on receipt papers a lot. So my question is, what do you have for somebody, or advice, I should say, for a young writer who doesn't know what the heck they're doing with their life? And how to pursue it, I guess. I don't know.
Yes.
Very undecided, but your work is so inspiring, and I just kind of want to hear how you got to that end zone of just pursuing it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think, like, I always think read a lot, like it's sort of like, I mean, it's just like really, and if people say you really got to read this person and you start to read it and you think, I don't get it, dismiss it, because there's so much, everybody will tell you what to read and everybody will tell you what you need to know. And it's sort of like, I think the thing, it's like there are writers that, like, I'm reading Kafka now, it's like when I was growing up, everybody was Kafka. I was thinking, I don't want to read Kafka, And so I found myself being the person in her 60s reading Metamorphosis and thinking, whoa, you're Metamorphosis? Look at me like I was crazy. But I think it's like to really be on your own time and to totally respect your embodied opinion. It's sort of like, it doesn't feel good to you, there's so much else. So I think it's like, like respecting your own taste and letting that guide you is really important. And when you find something, read lots of it. And not to be afraid of being influenced. Because I think it's like influence is just like thrifting. You just put on a shirt and you're like, this is my green shirt for about a year. And then you're like, this is not my green shirt. But it's sort of all like a pastiche of multiple of, writers, and I think it's sort of like to be not frightened. Influence is a great thing,
And you had a tenure-track job at the UC San Diego, correct?
Yeah.
Can you talk about leaving that and whether that felt like a decision to not be an academic poet?
Well, I felt like part of the thing about being, I've taught a lot and I love teaching, but part of the thing of being faculty is that you're expected to do the business of the university. The different, like, you'd be like an adjunct for years growling because they're getting, benefits and great pay and all that, but what you don't realize is they're doing everything, and I found that, and my nature was to do it, like it's like I'm social, I like organizations, I know how to do work, and so, but I noticed it didn't stop me from writing, and it didn't stop me, so I was productive, and I loved, the benefits of being part of a department and being in a university, but I was doing their business rather than mine, and there just is a component of being a writer, which is, quote, career. We don't like to talk about it, but it's really real. There are things that you sort of need to do, and you only have so much energy. So I just thought I got hired at 50, so I was like I came into the academy as a real, piece late, and so I really thought, I only have so many lives, and so I thought I'd rather do my business than theirs, and that's why I left. Yeah. And plus, I thought this is like the second most punk thing I've ever done in my life. It was to leave tenure. I was like,
Okay, so
this one right here.
I have kind of a frivolous question, possibly. When all those sort of a series of super Boston-y movies came out, Mystic River, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
I was thinking how much I would love it if someone had assigned you to write poem reviews of them or consult or anything. Did you have any, did it echo somewhere? Did you think about that? Or?
No, and I agree with you. I would have loved to have written about it, and because I watched every single one of them, I was very excited about it, and it was interesting. What's his name? Ben? Not
Casey Affleck? No?
Ben Affleck. Is kind of an interesting filmmaker. Not entirely, but he gets his Boston. His Boston is beautiful. It was almost like that was the experimental filmmaker in him, his way of seeing it. It was gorgeous, though not necessarily the plots and what happened, and it was weird. I mean, I guess it's sort of part of the social network. I mean, there's a little sort of an obsession with like pederasty. I was like, is that the only story in Boston? Like Whitey and pederasty. Like what about a female story? I mean, but I mean, still, it was compelling because I think there's a way in which it's like it's a small city, and there's a lot that's sort of unknown about Boston, and so I thought, like Boston's conflicts and it was exciting to me, but of course the bad Boston accents were amazing. It's really, I think it's a tough accent to imitate, and there, Jack Nicholson was terrible. I mean, he didn't even try, but the fighter was great. I thought that was an amazing one. I think that's not a frivolous question. And then your friend sitting next.
I just was wondering about something that you said in response earlier about memories and when since you've been back in Boston and walking around and feeling this visceral kind of experience. And you said there are certain things you can't write. And I was just wondering if you really felt that way, that experience might not be possible to express in writing.
Well, like what you can't write about now, later you can. I mean, I sort of, even, there was even doing this event today, I felt like there was an absurdity because I thought, I'm just like here, having this incredible feeling and having active conversations with people literally about, but there was a way in which to gurge it up. I mean, I thought this is, going to take a year or years, and so just like writing is just like in the same way we're talking about like what you read. It's sort of like, you don't really get to choose entirely what you write. And certainly not when you write it. Like I've had stories that were from my life that I just knew that was an amazing story, and it took 20 years for me to find a rhythm in which it could come out. It's almost like I think the doors are almost naturally closed, and it's like you have to figure out how to jog them. And again, you don't figure it out consciously. It kind of happens a bit, and then you don't stop it, mostly. So, but I think the being is the most important part, is to put the body in the place and then have the sensations and then figure out when they express.
I have a question about poetry. You said that standardized spelling is sort of language without the body, which I think is true and wonderful. And how do you, I'm thinking about your poems on the page in a visual way. Is there a way in which you fight against that? Or like how does the visual dimension of poetry work with the auditory things that you're exploring?
Do you mean the part which is line breaks or the part which is just how the words form?
Both.
Well, I mean, visually, it's like I think of them as sort of like denoting speed rather than, it's sort of like the line breaks don't mean stop here at all.
Mm-hmm.
Though sometimes stanzas mean silence. I like to think the sound ceases, and then I've gotten more permissive with myself as a reader in like adhering to how I actually imagine that, because at first there's so many different layers of permission in becoming a writer, right? It's sort of like, how do you learn how to read? You sort of learn how to read by watching other people, and then slowly you start to think, well, I don't really feel like that, and kind of adjusting. And so I've really given myself time. Like at first, nobody moved their hands, so I was like, I'm not going to move my hands, and then slowly I've become very illustrative. Because I think when I talk, I always wave my hands around. Mm-hmm. So slowly I've given myself permission to do that, and that's not on the page, and I'm starting to use, I really never wanted to use, certainly I'm not going to make sounds, like the vowel sounds that I was talking about be represented, but even things like gonna, I've started to think, I hate when I do an interview and then they transcribe it as gonna. I feel like they're just talking about class. They're just like, look how she, but increasingly, not always, but it's like a big debate when I'm like writing a poem or I think Gunna, actually maybe Gunna's great. Gunna's great, but it's poem by poem. Sometimes it seems so important that people hear Gunna, and that's part of the system of the poem, So it's just like, but I think part of it is part of not using, I do have certain things that I have, like cause, and cause is, it's so funny, like there's a COS cause, You know, that people, I don't like that at all, you know. And then there's a cause with an apostrophe, and I really don't like that, you know. But when I read Gertrude Stein's Lectures in America when I was like 24, and she just gave me all kinds of permission somehow in that book, and I just thought, cause is better. It's just better, you know. But sometimes you want because, sometimes you want the two syllables. But I've given my, you know, I fight with editors increasingly now because I'm me, you know. And before, though I was me, nobody knew I was me. Now I increasingly have permission to use cause, and they don't, you know. But sometimes at the last minute they put an apostrophe, and it really pisses me off. You know? But mostly, I really didn't want to go away from standard English on the page, so that what would stray was me, you know. That I would be the, you know, the fact of me would be the real life of the poem, and the poems, and on some level would die with me, which I kind of loved, you know. But now we have recordings, so it's a whole other thing.
Goodbye.
If I kept stirring, it swirled like white water, as if water were light and the stick a wand that made the light follow, then slow into water again, unwobbling until the wind moved it. And I thought of all the moons, floating in the wells and rivers, spilling over rocks where the water broke.